The woods are never truly silent. Even when you're alone, surrounded by trees, there's always that feeling that something is out there just beyond the firelight waiting. For most people, camping alone is a peaceful experience. For a few, it turns into a nightmare. Tonight, we'll hear 3 true stories from people who braved the wilderness only to discover they weren't as alone as they thought.
It was late summer, the kind of evening when the air carries a faint warmth, but the forest is already preparing for night. I decided to spend a night camping alone, something I'd done before, but this time felt different. The woods stretched endlessly behind my parents' property, unmarked and untouched, and that's where I wanted to be. Away from trails, away from people, just me and the silence of the trees. By late afternoon, I had found a small clearing where the light poured in like a golden spotlight. I set down my pack, pitched my tent, and cleared a circle for a small fire. The crackle of the flames mixed with the distant call of birds settling in for the night. I sat by the fire, roasting a marshmallow on a stick, watching the sunlight dip lower and lower until it kissed the treetops. The shadows grew long, stretching across the clearing like dark fingers. For a moment it felt perfect, peaceful, exactly what I came for. But the woods have a way of changing after sunset. Silence settles in, heavy and absolute. And in that silence, every sound suddenly matters. The fire had burned down to a soft glow, throwing just enough light to keep the shadows at bay. I was leaning back in my chair, half lost in thought, when I caught it. A sound. At first, I thought it was the wind moving through the trees. But then I realized it was a voice, a man's voice, low and muffled, as if he were talking to himself somewhere in the dark. I froze, listening harder. The words weren't clear, but the tone was unmistakable. He wasn't calling for help. He wasn't singing. He was muttering. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Out here, miles into the forest with no trails or campsites nearby, there shouldn't have been anyone. I swallowed and called out, "Hello?" The voice stopped. Just like that. The silence that followed was even worse. The fire popped once, sharp in the stillness, and then nothing. No footsteps, no leaves crunching. Just silence, thick and absolute, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. And in that moment, so was I. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself it was just my imagination, maybe the wind carrying some strange echo. But deep down, I knew better. I added more wood to the fire, the crackling flames giving me a fragile sense of comfort. I had just started to relax again when I heard it. The crunch of leaves. This time, it wasn't distant. It was close. Before I could react, a figure stepped out of the shadows. A man. He walked casually into the light of my fire, his face illuminated in flickers. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Without waiting for an invitation, he sat down across from me, holding his hands out toward the fire like we were old friends. My pulse quickened. I stammered, "Can I help you? This is my campsite." The man tilted his head slightly. "No," he said flatly. That was it. Just one word. No explanation. No attempt to leave. The silence between us stretched, heavy and unnatural, as if the forest itself was listening, and with every passing second the fire felt smaller, weaker, against the darkness pressing in. The man stared into the fire, his face half-lit, his expression unreadable. I forced myself to break the silence. "Were you the one I heard earlier?" Talking out in the woods. His eyes flicked up at me, the smile gone. His voice dropped flat. Must have been someone else. A chill ran through me. My gut screamed that I wasn't safe. And then, behind me, a sharp snap of a branch. I whipped my head around, another set of footsteps, just beyond the firelight. My stomach dropped. He wasn't alone. When I turned back, the man by the fire was staring directly at me. His eyes were cold, dead, and unblinking. For a moment, we just froze there, locked in a silence that felt endless. Then instinct took over. I shot up from my chair and bolted into the trees. Behind me, I heard one of them shout, their footsteps crashing through the underbrush as they gave chase. I ran blind, heart pounding, branches tearing at my arms. But I knew these woods. I'd grown up here. That was the only thing that saved me. After what felt like forever, the footsteps faded. Somehow I made it back to the road, lungs burning, hands shaking. When the police searched the campsite the next morning, everything was gone, as if no one had ever been there at all.
I'd always loved hiking, so when I found out you could rent old fire lookout towers in the middle of the forest, I couldn't resist. Most people preferred cozy cabins or busy campsites, but the idea of being completely cut off, miles from the nearest road, sounded perfect. The hike took nearly 6 hours, winding through rough, overgrown trails. When the tower finally came into view, it looked more like a forgotten relic than a safe haven. Perched on a hilltop, it wasn't tall, just a small wooden cabin raised 15 feet on stilts, surrounded by endless trees. The wood was weathered, patched in places where it had clearly rotted, and the staircase groaned as I climbed. Inside, the room was empty except for bare wooden floors and windows wrapping around every wall. No curtains, no locks on the door, just glass open to the dark forest on all sides. Still, the view was breathtaking. From up here, the forest stretched endlessly, rolling green hills fading into mountains. As the sun set, I told myself this would be an unforgettable experience. And I was right, but not for the reasons I hoped. That first night, I spread my sleeping bag across the creaky wooden floor. The wind whistled through the cracks in the frame, but otherwise it was silent, too silent. With no curtains, the darkness outside pressed against the windows, and the fact that the door had no lock lingered in my mind. I was just starting to doze off when I heard it, the heavy thump of footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate. I shot upright, heart hammering just as the door creaked open. A man stepped inside, older, maybe late 40s, with long blonde hair. His grin stretched wide when he saw me. "Great place to stay a few nights, isn't it?" he said, like we were sharing a secret. I nodded stiffly, explaining that I had reserved the tower, but he just stood there, looking around. Then, with that same unsettling grin, he said, "Well, there's plenty of room. It's just you here, right?" I lied, muttering that a friend of mine was on their way up the trail. The man's grin faded instantly. His eyes lingered on me for a long, heavy moment. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back down the stairs. And that's when I realized he hadn't been carrying a backpack or any gear at all. The next morning, sunlight made everything feel a little less eerie. I almost convinced myself the man had just been a harmless hiker passing through. But when I stepped outside, there was a note pinned to the railing at the bottom of the stairs. It was a torn scrap of paper. Written in uneven handwriting were 2 words: "Sorry face with smiling eyes." A chill ran through me. He had come back while I was sleeping. That night, I stayed awake longer, lantern flickering against the wooden walls. Every creak of the tower made my chest tighten. Midnight came and went. I was about to drift off when something caught my eye. Through the window at the base of the stairs stood a figure, motionless, watching. It was him. He didn't move, didn't call out, just stared up at the tower, his face hidden in shadow. I froze at the window, terrified that if I blinked, he'd start climbing. Minutes dragged by. Finally, he stepped backward into the dark and vanished into the trees. But I knew he was still out there, somewhere, waiting. And suddenly the silence of the forest didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like a warning. By the third night, I was too anxious to sleep. I kept circling the tower, staring out the windows into the blackness beyond the lantern light. Every time I looked away, I imagined him out there waiting for me to slip. Finally, around midnight, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to pack up. If I stayed, I knew something bad would happen. I stuffed my bag in frantic bursts, stopping every few seconds to glance at the stairs below. Then I froze. He was back. The man stood at the bottom step, motionless, his face angled toward the ground as if he were lost in thought. But I knew he wasn't. He was waiting. I couldn't breathe. My hands shook as I slid my pack onto my shoulders. I stood by the door, staring at him through the gaps in the railing. For 2 long minutes, he didn't move. And then, as if he'd heard my thoughts, he stepped back into the dark, gone. That was my chance. I crept down the stairs, every creak echoing in my skull, every shadow feeling alive. I didn't stop. I walked straight into the forest, lantern in one hand, knife in the other, until dawn finally broke. Had I stayed for the 3rd night, I don't think I'd be here to tell this story.
I had been on the road for days, driving through the endless stretch of the Alaska Highway. My SUV had been converted into a makeshift camper, and for the most part, it was peaceful. Long hours of solitude broken up by gas stations scattered hundreds of miles apart. The woods seemed to swallow the highway, and once the sun set, I may as well have been the only person alive on Earth. That night, I pulled into an empty campsite just off the road. No lights, no other vehicles, just silence and the faint sound of wind rushing through the trees. I locked up, settled in the back, and tried to sleep. Morning came with a sense of unease. As I stretched my legs, I noticed a narrow trail. Out of curiosity, I followed it, only to find another campsite. It looked abandoned, but not in a normal way. Gear scattered, things broken, as if someone had left in a hurry. I hurried back to my SUV. That's when I saw it. Parked right next to me was a black pickup truck, windows tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. No one got out. No one said a word. They were just sitting there, watching. I left quickly, heart pounding, and drove for hours before stopping for gas at one of the rare stations along the route. As I filled up, headlights appeared down the road. The same black truck rolled in, pulling up to the other side of the pump. Again, no one got out. That night, I camped at another isolated spot, determined to push the unease aside. But around midnight, as I lay in the back, I heard it. Footsteps crunching leaves, slow, measured. I sat up, and before I could react, a man's face pressed against the window, staring in. My chest locked in panic. A second later, another man slammed something against the rear window, shattering it. Adrenaline took over. I scrambled into the front seat, fumbling with the keys as one of them yanked at the back door. The SUV roared to life just as the door swung open. I floored it, tearing down the dirt road, gravel spitting under my tires. As I turned onto the highway, I glanced into the trees. The black truck was there, half hidden, its engine idling in the dark. They had followed me for miles, waiting for the perfect moment. I drove for hours without stopping, every pair of headlights in the mirror making my pulse race. To this day, I don't know what those men wanted. All I know is that out on that highway in the middle of nowhere, I was prey, and they were hunting. The woods can feel peaceful during the day, but at night, they remind us how small and vulnerable we really are. Whether it's a stranger in the dark, footsteps on the stairs, or headlights that won't stop following you, the scariest part is never knowing what their true intentions were. If you ever find yourself camping alone, just remember, the forest is never as empty as it seems. Would you dare spend a night out there by yourself? Let me know in the comments. And sleep well tonight.